This is the twisted tale of a man who turned hospitals into hunting grounds. This is Donald Harvey, the Angel of Death. Hey, y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potto. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends over there in Scotland.
Yes.
Scotland, get in my belly. Fulcha.
And that came from Fat Bastard himself.
It did. I want my baby back.
Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Then like, rate, and review the podcast so others who are like you, who love true crime, can find us. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button below.
Yep.
You can find us on Instagram at Hitched to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And if you want true crime every single day, please go join our closed Facebook group. It's called the In-Laws and Outlaws.
And there are a bunch of fun in-laws and outlaws.
Yes, there are. You get to decide which one you want to be. Go to Facebook and type in H2H, In-Laws and Outlaws. Answer a couple questions. You're in. Go join. We love those people. They are absolutely the best. I'm putting a call out right now to all the In-Laws and Outlaws. Today is October 1st.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready for all your scary movie recommendations. Rob's not much of a scary movie watcher. I love them.
I'm more of a Caddyshack guy.
Send me all your recommendations. Post them in the In-Laws and Outlaws. We can all watch them together.
Yes.
We also now have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you want to send Rob some coffee. He drinks it every single episode.
Please do.
You can find that link in our show notes, and you can also now send us a text. You can send us a little message. The link to that is at the top of the show notes. It says, send Chris and Rob a text.
Yes.
Bring them on, people. We love to hear from you.
Yep.
Rob and I have both lived in the city we're talking about, Cincinnati, Ohio.
Great city.
It is a great city, and I was actually living there right after our serial killer gets caught. Mm. And the hospital, Drake Hospital, was across the street from my apartment complex.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And everybody always said, that's where the angel of death, that's where he was. I'm like, what? Lock your doors. I'm like, he's not coming after me.
Well, I went to the University of Cincinnati, and the worst thing that ever happened there is I had a grumpy music teacher.
Worst thing that ever happened there was that he didn't have enough money to get Skyline chili.
I missed my lunch.
A 5-way and a Coney all the way.
And a Pepsi. But now it's Coke.
Is it Coke?
Yeah, they changed it.
Oh, man, that means I can't get Diet Mountain Dew anymore at Skyline Chili. That was one of my favorite things.
All gone.
See, I got the Diet Mountain Dew in every episode. I got to get it in there. Somehow. Eventually, Mountain Dew's going to come and say, "Hey,
we want to sponsor you.
We want to sponsor you because we fuel that woman every single day."
Exactly.
Yes, you do. Before we get started today, I want to thank some sources: the Cincinnati Enquirer, WCPO, Fox 19, Murderpedia, Wikipedia, the Radford University's Department of Psychology, and there is a book. Actually, there are multiple books. This one is Defending Donald Harvey, the case of America's most notorious angel of death serial killer.
Wow.
By William Wayland and Bruce Martin. William Wayland was his attorney. Attorneys need to, it's not a brief, William. You need to make that, title a little bit shorter.
Yep.
I did read the book, and we will have links for all of those in the show notes.
Okay. Well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
Donald Harvey is born just north of Cincinnati in Butler County, Hamilton, Ohio, on April 15th, 1952, to Ray and Goldie Harvey.
Goldie.
Goldie. What a great name, right?
Yeah.
But shortly after he's born, his parents pack up and move to Boonville, Kentucky in the Appalachian Mountains. He's going to be the oldest of 3 children. His mom is quoted as saying, quote, "Donald was always a good boy," end quote. Isn't that what all mothers say about their sons?
Yeah, I wonder how that turned out.
Not good. When he's about 6 months old, Harvey's dad falls asleep while holding him, and he drops him on his head.
Oops.
They didn't think he was injured, but you know that old joke where you dropped on your head as a kid? Well, Harvey actually was.
Bumbles bounce.
Yeah, babies bounce. They do. I mean, both of my kids rolled off the changing table, and they both seemed fine.
At least that's our story.
That's our story. I'm sticking to it. That's right. In 1956, at the age of 4, Harvey begins many long years of sexual abuse. His uncle Wayne, his mother's half-brother, would sexually abuse him when he went to his grandmother's house. Now, Uncle Wayne liked to use little Donald to help him masturbate, but they also engaged in oral sex.
Oh, geez.
A year later, at the age of 5, Harvey falls off the running board of a moving truck.
Good Lord.
He knocks himself in the head again. He doesn't lose consciousness, but he's got a big old cut about 4 inches long on the back of his head. Also, at the age of 5, more sexual abuse occurs. A neighbor, an older man named Dan Thomas, sexually abuses him. Later, Donald's going to say that he liked that Dan gave him money after he abused him.
Gee.
And this sexual abuse is going to go on, according to Donald, for about 13 years.
Wow.
Now, at the time, he said he was worried that Dan would hurt his mother. But after 13 years, he realized that Dan just wanted to have sex with him.
Yeah.
Martha Turner, who was the principal of the school that Donald went to for 1st through 8th grade, said that Donnie, they called him Donnie, was a, quote, "very special child to me. He was always clean and well-dressed with his hair trimmed. He was a happy child, very sociable and well-liked by the other children. He was a handsome boy with a big brown eyes and dark curly hair. He always had a smile for me. There was never any indication of any abnormality," end quote. His classmates had a different viewpoint of little Donnie.
Okay.
They said he was a loner and a teacher's pet. He was a brown noser. He didn't participate in extracurricular activities and instead was a bookworm. I was also a bookworm who liked to dream about the future. I would too if I was being sexually abused. I'd want to grow up and get the hell out of there.
Yep.
He also said that it was hard being an effeminate boy, which he was, in eastern Kentucky, where the social scene, the biggest social scene, is, Wednesday night at the Baptist church.
Yeah.
In 1968, Donald starts high school, Boonville High School. He gets pretty good grades, mostly A's and B's, without putting forth much effort. But eventually he becomes bored and he drops out of high school when he's just a freshman. He doesn't really know what to do with himself at this point, and for reasons that I could not find anywhere, he decides to move to Cincinnati, other than the fact that maybe he was born there, right?
Or there's Skyline Chili.
Or he's moving there for the Skyline Chili. I would bet my bottom dollar that somewhere along the way, Donald Harvey ate Skyline Chili.
Probably.
By the way, the best I can tell from records and dates, he's 15 going on 16 years old when he drops out of school and leaves his parents' house. He's 15.
Wow.
And after moving to Cincinnati, he finds work at a factory. I also read it's at this time, when he turns 16, that he has his first sexual encounter where he is an equal partner. It is another man. He is homosexual. Also, at the age of 16, he gets his GED through the American School, which is a correspondence school in Chicago. Okay. So he's got his high school diploma now.
All right.
By 1969, he's started an on-again, off-again relationship with a man named James Peluso. This is going to happen. These two are going to be together and not together, and be together and not together for like the next 15 years.
All right.
By the time 1970 rolls around, work has slowed at the factory and he's laid off from his job. And this is about the same time his mom calls and says, "Hey, you need to come home to Kentucky. Your grandfather is in the hospital in London, Kentucky," and that's the southern part of the state. And Donald's got nothing better to do. He doesn't have a job.
Right.
So he heads to London and Marymount Hospital.
Okay.
Just a side note, this hospital has since been torn down. There's a new hospital there. It's now called St. Joseph London. Regardless, Donald's going to go to Marymount Hospital, and this is the beginning of Donald's descent into madness and murder. This is where it all starts.
Wow.
Donald's spending lots of time at the hospital with his mom, watching over his dying grandfather. So much so that he would chat up the nuns to the point where he was really well liked. The nuns were always seeking him out to have a little chit chat with him. And one nun asked him one day, remember I said he was a brown noser, so
Right.
he was pulling a fast one over on the nuns.
Right.
But one day one of the nuns asked him if he might be interested in working at the hospital as an orderly. And his factory job is gone in Cincinnati, so he takes the job the very next day, May 11th, 1970.
Okay.
He's now an official resident of London, Kentucky, and an orderly where he is able to spend time alone with patients.
Right.
Now Donald is 18 years old. I also read that at this time he's raped by his roommate, the guy he's living with.
Good Lord.
Yeah, this one's got a bad sexual history.
Yeah.
At this point, something happens. Something shifts, something snaps. And to this day, there are lots of criminal psychologists that just can't explain why all of a sudden Donald goes to what I'm going to call the dark side.
Okay.
His first day at work, like I said, is May 11th, 1970, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just 2 weeks later, on May 30th, Donald smothers patient Logan Evans with a sheet of blue plastic and a pillow.
Wow.
Donald said that it was during an evening shift. He walked into the private room. There were no witnesses. He's just checking on Mr. Evans, who was actually a stroke victim. Donald's later going to tell a reporter at the Cincinnati Post that Logan Evans, this is the patient, rubbed feces in his face. So maybe he came in to change his bedpan.
Yeah.
And Donald got really angry. He lost all control. He listens to Mr. Evans' heart rate with a stethoscope until he is dead.
Wow.
He disposes of the plastic. He cleans up the patient. He dresses him in a clean hospital gown. Then Donald gets in the shower himself because if you believe the story the way he tells it, he's got feces all over him.
Right.
After he gets cleaned up, then he called the nurse to say he thought something was wrong. Quote, no one ever questioned it, end quote. And I just got to say, if you're a healthcare worker and you haven't had if you haven't been thrown up on or bled on, if you're going to be in healthcare, it's going to happen.
Yep.
Now, I do want to say there are conflicting reports on some of the dates and some of the patients' names. I'm unsure of whether there were just so many different sources that listed them differently or if Donald has recounted them to different people in different ways, but I am going to do my very, very best to get them all in there and correctly.
Okay.
On May 30th, 1970, one day after killing Mr. Evans, Donald murders James Tyree. He says this was accidental. He uses the wrong size catheter on him. And Mr. Tyree allows Donald to put a catheter in, but then yelled at him to take it out. And when he did, Donald uses the heel of his hand to control him until he vomits and dies.
Oh, wow.
June 22nd, 1970, Donald murders Elizabeth Wyatt. This is Donald's first, what he would call, mercy kill. Donald is aware that Elizabeth has been praying to die. She tells him that she wishes that she could just die. So Donald turns off her oxygen supply. He just turns it to very, very low, and then he watches her die. 4 hours later, a nurse finds her dead.
Wow.
Now, 1970 is a busy year for Donald. He's moved, procured a new job. He's now killed 5 people, 6 if you count the faulty O2 tank.
Right.
But also during 1970, Donald forms a relationship, one that's going to last about 7 months. His name is Vernon Midden.
Okay.
And Vernon is a mortician who is married and has children.
Okay.
But he's a closet homosexual. Vernon becomes Donald's lover, and Vernon teaches Donald lots of ins and outs of how a body will react when certain things are done to it. Things like smothering it, And this is going to help him out in the long run. Vernon also introduces Donald to something else, the occult. Vernon tells Donald all about it. Can you imagine if your mortician is into the occult? What's he doing to dead bodies?
I don't want to think about it.
But Vernon tells him all about it, and Donald can't participate in any of the rituals because he's not a, quote, member. Okay? So you got to be a member, apparently.
All right.
July 10th, 1970, Donald kills Eugene McQueen by turning him on his stomach when he knew he wasn't supposed to. Eugene drowns in his own fluids. Donald tells the nurse that Mr. McQueen doesn't look good. He, quote, looks bad, end quote. Well, he looks bad because he's dead.
Yeah.
The nurse tells Donald to continue what he's supposed to do. Donald bathes him after he's already dead to avoid suspicion. This was ultimately covered up by the hospital, that the man was dead, and then Donald gave him a bath.
Really?
And in fact, the doctors and nurses at the hospital teased him for bathing a dead body, a dead man.
Wow.
Yeah, that's bad for business.
They knew all about this.
They knew this. They knew that he had bathed a man that was already dead.
Right.
They didn't know he killed him.
No.
July 12th, 1970, Donald kills Harvey Williams. This was an accident as well, he said. He said that Donald had a faulty oxygen tank and the patient went into cardiac arrest. But he didn't do anything, no life-saving measures. Once he realized it was a faulty tank, whatever.
Yeah.
On July 28th, 1970, Donald murdered Ben Gilbert. This is the first time Donald has thought about the murder first. It's not a reactionary kill. This is premeditated. Donald has an altercation with Mr. Gilbert. Mr. Gilbert thinks that Donald is trying to kill him. And for once, he wasn't trying to kill the patient, according to him.
Okay.
But Gilbert's accusing him of that he's actually suffering from something called hospital dementia, where like older folks really get confused in the hospital.
Right.
And Mr. Gilbert had actually thrown a punch and knocked Donald unconscious with a urinal and poured its contents over him, claiming that he thought Donald was a burglar. Now, Donald retaliated by catheterizing Mr. Gilbert using a female-sized number 20 catheter instead of the smaller 18, which is used for men. He then straightened out a coat hanger and shoved the wire through the catheter about 2 feet, puncturing his bladder and his bowel, and Mr. Gilbert went into shock.
Wow.
He broke into a cold sweat. He went into a coma. He died of sepsis.
Wow.
Donald disposed of the wire and replaced the number 20 catheter with the correct catheter. 4 days later, on July 28th, Ben Gilbert dies from the infection that has set in.
Wow.
August 15th, 1970, Donald murders Maud Nichols using a faulty oxygen tank. And this made me think Harvey Williams also died because of a faulty O2 tank. Mm-hmm. So did he see the first person die that way and thought, I could add that to my bag of tricks. Right. I could do that one too.
Put that on my resume.
And one of the things about Maud is that she comes to the hospital, I'm assuming from a nursing home, and she has bed sores that were so bad that she had maggots in the bed sores.
Oh my gosh.
And nobody wanted to take care of her. So Donald killed her.
Jeez.
August 30th, he murders William Bowling by not turning his oxygen on. He'd been brought into the hospital due to difficulty breathing. Donald's action was intentional, but also spontaneous. He wanted to end the patient's struggles to breathe. Can you believe that?
Man.
He died of a heart attack, a massive heart attack. November 4th, 1970. We're still in 1970.
Yeah, I mean, he's on a roll.
He's on a big roll. November 4th, 1970, Donald murdered Viola Reed Ryan using a faulty oxygen tank. He commented that she smelled bad. She was suffering from leukemia and electrolyte imbalance, and he decided to end her suffering. So he attempted to kill her by plastic and pillow smothering. By the way, he uses the plastic so there are no fibers in the esophagus or in the mouth from the pillow.
Sure.
So he tries this first. But somebody comes in and he has to stop. and then he got the faulty oxygen tank out, and he killed her that way.
Wow.
December 7th, 1970, he murdered Margaret Harrison by giving her an overdose of Demerol, morphine, and codeine that was intended for another patient. He monitored her pulse until it dropped to 0, and she stopped breathing. So he likes to be there when the life drains out of their bodies.
Just sick.
By January of 1971, Donald's relationship with Vernon, the mortician, is on the rocks. It's fizzling. And later Donald will say that he became really depressed. And he also fantasized about embalming Vernon alive.
Oh.
Yeah.
Jeez.
On January 9th, 1971, he murdered Sam Carroll using a faulty oxygen tank. He had pneumonia and an obstruction of his small intestine, and Donald decided he had suffered enough, and he revived the old faulty oxygen tank. He comes rolling it out and using the old oxygen tank that doesn't work.
I have a question. So these faulty oxygen tanks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do they know that these people are dying by the faulty oxygen?
No, apparently not.
Wow. Okay.
Apparently not.
So it's kind of a foolproof for him.
It is kind of for him. I don't know if he's saving that one and then rolling it out when he needs it, or if he's turning the oxygen on, but it's so low that they're not getting enough oxygen. And then then when they do walk in, he turns it up to be where it's supposed to be, the number it's supposed to be at.
Sure.
But he's alone with these people all the time.
Right.
January 15th, Donald killed Maggie Rollins by smothering her with a pillow. He puts the plastic bag between her face and her pillow so she doesn't get fibers in her airways. Mm-hmm. She was just being treated for a bad burn on her arm. So he uses this excuse that, they're like mercy killings and these people wanted to die and I'm putting them out of their misery. All she had was a burn on her arm.
Yeah.
January 23rd, 1971. We're not even out of January yet.
Man.
Donald murdered Silas Butler using a faulty oxygen tank. He'd been experiencing kidney problems. He had attempted to kill him multiple times by smothering him, but every single time he gets the pillow over his face, Donald gets interrupted. Now, there was an autopsy in this case, but the true cause of death was never discovered.
Wow.
January 26, 1971, Donald murders John Combs, faulty oxygen tank. He had a bad heart and had a hard time breathing. He tried to smother him with a plastic bag unsuccessfully, so he goes back to his faulty O2 tank.
Right.
Then there's a little bit of a dry spell, and we go all the way from January to March 14th, 1971. He murdered Milton Bryant Sasser by giving him an overdose of morphine that he had stolen from the cabinet at the nurse's station. He'd been brought in for congestive heart failure, and Donald made the mistake of trying to dispose of the hypodermic needle in a toilet and stopped it up.
Oh.
And then the maintenance man had to show up, and he sees the needle. But nobody made the connection between this syringe in the toilet and Milton's death.
Yeah, because in 1971, these days, whenever there's a medicine cabinet out at the nurse station or wherever, they have to sign out for it. They have to make a record of it. If it's missing, they know what's going on.
Well, there's a bar. If you've been to the hospital at any point with your parents or you've been in the hospital, there's like a barcode. Mm-hmm. It's on your name tag, on your wrist. It's on all your medication. They scan you. They scan the medication. They keep track of everything.
I wonder if it's because of a situation like this.
That for sure.
Yeah, he set precedents.
Then on March 27th, 1971, it's Donald's last day at Marymount Hospital. 4 days later, on March 31st, Donald is picked up on a drunk and disorderly charge. When he's released from the jail, he sets a fire in the bathroom in an empty apartment in his apartment building. He said he did it because he was depressed. It was an unsuccessful suicide attempt on his part because he was trying to asphyxiate himself.
Okay.
I guess with the smoke. And he's so good at killing all these other people. Why wouldn't he just shoot himself up with morphine and codeine and whatever?
Yeah. Happy trails.
He's arrested. He has to pay a $50 fine. So back then, I guess the going rate for arson was $50.
Wow.
He's also arrested for burglary in his own apartment building. The real reason they arrested Donald was so the police could question him about his association with the occult. And while being questioned, Donald starts prattling on about all the murders he has committed.
What?
He's telling the police. He's unburdening his soul. He's talking about all these people that he has killed.
Wow.
And these officers that arrested him, you know, they're a little bit puzzled, but they look into what he's saying to see if he's nuts or if he's a mass murderer. They question him extensively, but they can't find any credible evidence to charge him with murder.
So he's not telling him that he was at this hospital. He's just saying he murdered people.
I think he's telling them he was at this hospital and he murdered these people. Yeah, I think he gave names.
Well, why wouldn't you check that out? And okay.
Well, remember who he's killing. He's killing people, except for the woman who had the burn on her arm.
Sure.
He's basically killing people with one foot in the grave and another on a banana peel.
Right.
So they're on their way to see the Lord to begin with, right?
I guess.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the police are thinking he's just a serial confessor. He's nuts.
Okay.
And a couple weeks later, he goes on trial for the burglary charges in his apartment complex, and he gets a reduced charge of petty theft. And one little fine later, he was free to go.
Back out there.
Yep. He leaves London, Kentucky, and goes to Frankfort, Kentucky, where he stays with the Hodges family.
Okay.
You know the old joke? How do you say the capital of Kentucky? Is it Louisville or Louisville?
Right.
It's Frankfort.
Yeah.
That's always the joke.
Okay, yeah.
Frankfort, Kentucky. That is the capital of Kentucky.
Yep.
And Donald's going to apply for a job in Frankfort, but while he's doing it while he's living with this Hodges family. And he has his first heterosexual encounter with the Hodges daughter. Her name is Ruth Ann.
Okay.
He's staying with this family in Frankfort.
Wow.
And he and Ruth Ann get drunk, and he would later say that he didn't remember what happened, although he remembered being naked with her. And 9 months later, Ruth Ann's going to have a son that she names Donald, and she says,
it's his.
Donald's the father.
Yeah.
Now, it's important to note that Donald has talked about not one but two children at times, and other times he denies that either one of them ever existed. Now, all of this is in the first 6 months of 1971. He's killed these people. He's leaving London, Kentucky. He's set an apartment on fire. He's burglarized somebody else's apartment in his complex. And then he moves to Frankfurt and gets somebody pregnant.
He's a high achiever.
Apparently. It's exactly what his principal said.
Wow.
So this is all the first 6 months of 1971.
Okay.
June 16th, 1971, Donald enlists in the Air Force. And later that year, he would have another sexual encounter with Jim Peluso. Remember, we talked about him on and off.
Right.
After sex, Donald wants to murder Jim, but he doesn't. He's afraid he'll get caught. And Jim isn't sick, even though he wants to murder him. The only thing that's keeping him from killing him is that he's too afraid.
Right.
Now, while he's still enlisted in the Air Force, he tries to kill himself. He tries to commit suicide by overdosing on NyQuil. And the reason is that he's depressed. And on March 9th, 1972, he is actually discharged from the Air Force. His discharge was classified as medical reasons, an unhonorable discharge. But the overdose of NyQuil and the Air Force finding out about his dabbling in the occult resulted in therapy and a goodbye from Uncle Sam.
Right.
So he's really unhappy, he's depressed, and he's not getting along with his family. And later that year in 1972, he tries to commit suicide one more time.
Wow. How much NyQuil do you have to drink to commit suicide?
Well, I'm assuming he's just trying to put himself to sleep, slow his breathing enough that he stops breathing.
Okay.
But I would think that would take a lot of NyQuil.
Yeah.
But it is 1971, 1972, so who knows? I mean, cocaine was in Coca-Cola.
Sure.
So let's be real about this, right?
Right.
Not in 1972, there wasn't cocaine in it, but, come on, think about it. Yeah.
Yep.
But this time when he tries to commit suicide, he tries to do it using something called Placidil, which is a sedative and a hypnotic used in the 50s, and Equanil, which is used for anxiety because he's depressed due to not getting along with his family. Now, they've been fighting. He's been fighting with them. He's been taken to the hospital where his stomach is pumped, and then he's transferred to the VA hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, where we are as an inpatient. Yeah. And his parents told him, you can't come home. You're no longer welcome. They didn't like the suicide attempts.
Yeah.
And while there was another bungled suicide attempt, it got him put in restraints. And then they gave him 21 electroshock therapy treatments.
Wow.
21.
Gee whiz.
Wow.
Wow.
October 17th, 1972, he's released from the VA hospital here in Lexington. And later his mama, Goldie, she's going to condemn the hospital for releasing him. She didn't think he showed any signs of improvement. But yet she's not taking him home with her either. So...
yeah, don't give him to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's living in Lexington. He's treated as an outpatient. And by the end of 1972, Donald is working at Cardinal Hill Convalescent Hospital in Lexington.
Okay.
He's a part-time nurse's aide. And then he takes a second job at Lexington's Good Samaritan Hospital. This is where I was actually born.
Okay.
Now, at this point, Donald is a mere 21 years old, y'all. He's only 21.
Donald's packed a lot of stuff in that 21 years.
He has.
Wow.
He begins dating a man named Russell Addison, and they live together for 10 months. And by 1973, he begins a relationship with a man named Ken Estes. And these two lived together on again, off again for like 5 years. But this is also the time where he gets even more involved with the occult, which I had absolutely no idea that we had in Lexington, Kentucky.
Yeah.
But he keeps both jobs until August of 1974 when he takes a job as a telephone operator.
Well, that's random.
I agree, but he must have just needed a job.
Sure.
He then moves back to northern Kentucky and takes a clerical job at St. Luke's Hospital in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. He didn't kill anybody during this time, and Donald would say that he was able to control his urges. But honestly, I just think he didn't have the opportunity to ever be alone with anybody.
Yeah, if he's a clerical, I mean.
Yeah, which is why I think he leaves this job at the telephone company in September of 1975. He's restless. Right. He's also taking medication, too, for his depression. Now, by September of 75, Donald is working as a nurse's assistant at the VA hospital in Cincinnati. He's working the night shift. Can't think of a worse place or a worse shift for this guy.
Yep.
And this is when he begins to murder again. In the month of September, Donald reduced oxygen flow of Joseph Harris, possibly resulting in his death, although he was never indicted for this death. James Twitty, James Ritter, Harry Rhodes, and Sterling Moore died in the ward on Donald's watch.
And nobody put it together.
Nobody put it together.
Wow.
Donald believes he had something to do with their deaths, but can't remember specifics. Really?
Yeah.
This is really surprising because the reason he can remember the others is because he started keeping a diary full of copious details on how he murdered each victim.
Man.
I mean, I guess at this point, they all start to run together.
Yeah.
But folks, if you're keeping track at home, the tally now is 20 dead bodies.
Jeez.
By June of 1977, 3 years later, at the age of 25, Donald joins the occult through an initiation that is only for heterosexual couples. Because I guess Satan doesn't like same-sex marriage.
Wow.
Come on, Satan. Anyway, he's paired with a woman named Jan as his partner, and the two of them were initiated by switching partners with a couple already in the occult.
Man.
Jan is the woman who, if you believe him, gives him his second child.
Okay.
Now, here's where it gets creepy, if it's not creepy enough already.
Yeah.
During Donald's occult initiation, he receives his spiritual guide, whose name is Duncan.
Okay.
And Duncan was a doctor in his former life.
All right. I'm trying to follow this.
That's called foreshadow.
Oh, here we go.
Yep.
Wow.
So he gets, it's kind of like a spirit guide. I guess this is like your guardian angel, only if you're going to hell instead.
Right.
Yeah. And his name is Duncan.
So Duncan, he's not a doctor, but he was a doctor in his former life.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. It's the spirit of a doctor.
All right.
Who's into the occult apparently and headed on his way to hell.
So what's Duncan do now?
He's on the highway to hell. What?
What does Duncan do for a living?
Duncan's not a real person.
Oh. It's a spirit?
It's his spiritual guide.
Oh, well, people have...
I love it.
Well, no, people have spiritual guides, but they're real people.
Yeah, he's not like a shaman.
Yeah.
This is like a dead person named Donald who was into the occult, and he's now Duncan is now Donald's spiritual guide. And in his former life, he was a doctor.
This is so weird.
Do I need to make a chart for this?
I think you do. I've never heard of a spiritual guide not being a live person.
Well, that's why I said he's kind of like a guardian angel, unless you're on the highway to hell.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
In 1980, Donald starts dating a man named Doug Hill. This is also an on-again, off-again relationship. They fight a lot, and after one fight, Donald slips a little bit of arsenic into Doug's ice cream.
Wow.
Doug is the first person outside of the hospital setting that Donald has tried to kill. He wasn't successful, but he's getting really confident and he's feeling unstoppable. And why not?
Right.
Because no one has ever questioned him.
Sure.
And he's even confessed to all of those police officers.
Right, right.
And he's got his demon whatever that he carries around with him that tells him what to do.
His spiritual guide.
His spiritual demon.
It's not a real person.
His demon guide named Duncan. Okay. Duncan the demon. Maybe that's what I should call him.
Wow.
By August 1st of 1980, with his relationship with Doug behind him, he begins a relationship with a man named Carl Howeller. And they move in together, they settle down, but when Donald finds out that Carl has been going to the park on Mondays to, quote, play around, end quote, with other men, Donald starts feeding him small doses of arsenic to make him sick on Sunday so he doesn't feel up to playing around on Mondays at the park.
Wow.
Also, Carl has a friend, Diane Alexander. Diane is what Donald calls Carl's fag hag. His words, not mine. Yeah. Don't email me.
Yeah.
Donald thinks that Diane wants to break up his relationship with Carl. So here's what Donald does. He poisons her by putting a hepatitis B serum that he stole from the VA hospital into her drink. It was coffee.
Wow.
Then he poisons her with acrylic acid and tries to infect her with AIDS, which he stole from the VA as well.
Oh, my God.
But it doesn't work. Now, she did end up in the hospital, and I read where Donald said the reason that it didn't work was because she was too overweight, and he didn't give her enough of everything. But she did end up in the hospital.
Okay.
But Diane's not the only woman Donald doesn't like. 63-year-old Helen Metzger is also Donald's neighbor, and he believes that she's trying to come between him and Carl. And in March of 1983, Donald starts poisoning Helen. He did this by sprinkling arsenic on the leftovers he gave to her and inside a jar of mayonnaise as well.
Jeez.
Several weeks later, he gives her more in a pie. And he claims he didn't mean to give her a lethal dose. What? I just wanted to give her a little bit, right?
Yeah. Wow.
But paralysis set in, and then following a tracheotomy, she starts hemorrhaging. She never regained consciousness. She died on April 10th. And when she died, it was attributed to Guillain-Barré syndrome. But not only Helen was affected, her family got sick due to the arsenic in the mayonnaise after they gathered at her apartment for her funeral.
Wow.
Now, nobody died everybody thought they had food poisoning. But he had poisoned the whole family. Also in April, Donald had a squabble with Carl's parents, and he began to poison their food with arsenic. On May 1st, 1983, Carl's father, Henry, suffers a stroke and was admitted to Providence Hospital. By late 1983, Donald has accidentally murdered Howard Vetter, Carl's brother-in-law. Donald had been using wood alcohol to remove adhesive labels, and he left the solution in a vodka bottle. Now, why not just use the wood alcohol out of the container it came in? Why do you need to put it in a vodka bottle?
To kill people?
Carl served drinks to his brother-in-law from this vodka bottle.
Jeez.
Yeah. His name was Howard, and Howard was sick for a week, and then he had a heart attack. And his death was only attributed to a cardiac arrest, and that was it.
Listen, I know what vodka tastes like, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't taste like paint thinner.
Well, maybe it wasn't straight vodka. Maybe he mixed it with something like orange juice or who knows what.
I'm still going to think wow, this is the worst screwdriver I've ever had. Jeez. Okay, sorry.
You're not lying.
Yeah.
That's true. Donald visited Carl's father, Henry, at the hospital and placed arsenic in his pudding before leaving. Henry Howeller died later that night. Harvey continued to poison Carl's mother, Margaret, off and on for the next year, but he was unsuccessful in his attempts to kill her.
Wow.
In January 1984, Carl breaks up with Donald and asks him to pack up his things and get the out.
Little Eddie Murphy.
Yeah. Donald was angry at this rejection. He spent the next 2 years trying to kill Carl with his poisonous concoctions because he doesn't actually leave Carl's life. So he asked him to move out, but I don't think he did, or he moves out and they're still around each other because their relationship is going to go on for years. September 19th, 1984, Donald accidentally kills Hiram Prophet by giving him the wrong dosage of heparin. He tells nobody about the error at the hospital. It's never detected. He's still working at the VA hospital in Cincinnati, doing what he calls the Lord's work. In November 1984, Donald murders his old ex-boyfriend, Jim Polosco.
Wow.
Jim had asked him to, quote, help him out, end quote, if he ever became unable to care for himself. So Donald gave him arsenic in a daiquiri and in some pudding. He felt ill. He was at home. He was sent to the VA hospital. Jim's death had been expected due to his cardiac problems, so no autopsy was performed. Donald considered this a mercy killing. March 1985, Donald murders his neighbor, or Carl's neighbor, Edward Wilson. Mr. Wilson thought that Carl was cheating him on his utility bills. So I don't know if Mr. Wilson and Carl were sharing a duplex or they split the utility bills or what was going on.
Right.
But he questioned it. Okay. So Donald put arsenic into Mr. Wilson's Pepto-Bismol. He died 5 days later on March 23rd, 1985.
Wow.
He says he was protecting Carl from Mr. Wilson. If you're counting, we are now at 26 and Donald is 32.
Jeez.
March 1985, Donald is promoted at the VA hospital to morgue supervisor. So where do you put the guy who's into the occult and kills people in the hospital?
Of course.
The morgue.
Yeah, makes sense.
That same spring, he joins the National Socialist Party, the neo-Nazis, and later he will claim that he wasn't a sympathizer, but instead was there to gather intel for friends of his that wanted to destroy the party.
Okay.
Whatever you need to tell yourself, Donald.
Yeah.
On July 18th, 1985, the security guards noticed that Donald was acting suspicious. He was acting hinky.
Okay.
And before he leaves, they're like, yeah, we're just going to take a look inside your gym bag. Let's just look inside this bag. Mm-hmm. And inside the satchel, the guards discovered a .38 caliber gun, hypodermic needles, surgical scissors and gloves, a cocaine spoon, various medical texts, 2 books on the occult, and a biography of serial killer Charles Sabraj. Now, Donald works at this VA, which is owned by the federal government, and you can't bring a firearm onto federal property, in case y'all didn't know that.
Right.
So Donald is fined $50.
Woo.
And then he was given the option to quietly resign from his job at the VA rather than being fired.
Got it.
Nothing about the incident was ever noted in his work record, and hospital authorities did not open an investigation to determine if Donald had committed any other crimes while working at the VA. Donald would later say that he thought Carl planted the gun in his gym bag to get him into trouble. Yeah, it had nothing to do with that cocaine spoon and whatever, dude.
Yeah.
On February 24th, 1986, Donald takes a job at Drake Memorial Hospital as a part-time nurse's aide. Now, nobody questions anything about his reasons for leaving these other jobs behind or leaving the VA, and his work folder says nothing but good things about him. He's now 33, and his next killing spree was going to be epic. And not only that, remember Duncan the demon? Remember Duncan, his fictitious spiritual guide that he got when he joined the occult? Well, Donald's really into this occult thing now, and he's going to choose who to kill by consulting Duncan.
Just when I think the bar has been set for weirdness.
Donald would place a skull that many believe he stole from the morgue at the VA beside a burning candle. Then he would read a list of names and look into the flickering flames, and that's how he decided who would die next.
Jeez.
He would later say, quote, "I had to have help from somewhere," end quote. This guy.
Yeah. Donald's a little messed up.
April 8th, 1986, Donald murders Nathaniel Watson by smothering him with a wet plastic garbage can liner, which he placed over his face, pushing it into his mouth and into his nostrils. He'd tried to kill him in the same manner multiple times, but he kept getting interrupted each time. He didn't think that Watson, who was a semi-comatose man being fed through a gastric tube, should live that way. He had also heard that Watson was a convicted rapist, even though this was never substantiated. He removed the pillow and threw the plastic bag in the trash and carried on to his next patient. Mr. Watson was found dead 45 minutes later by a nurse.
Wow.
April 12th, 1986, Donald killed Leon Nelson by smothering him in the same manner as Nathaniel Watson. April 19th, Donald murders Virgil Weddle by putting rat poison into his pudding. He died of an apparent heart attack, which was expected because of his illness. And Donald took cookies from Virgil and ate them during his occult ceremony for Duncan. Not only am I going to kill you, I'm going to take these cookies out of your room, and then while I'm having my ceremony with Duncan the demon, I'm going to eat your cookies.
Now see, taking cookies, that crosses the line.
Don't take another man's cookies.
That's it.
The next day, April 20th, he attempted to kill Lawrence Bernston with rat poison. He tries to do this over and over again, but Lawrence got transferred to a nursing home, and he died there 3 days later. May 2nd, his relationship with Carl started to have lots of trouble. What, Carl? Seriously? He's killed everybody in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
These two were arguing a lot. He became paranoid that Carl was out to get him. And Donald and Carl break up. And if I was Carl, I would have been worried because Donald has poisoned him several times. He just doesn't know it.
Man.
Also, on May 2nd, same day as things start to go south with Carl, Donald murdered Doris Nally by putting cyanide into her apple juice.
Oh, my gosh.
May 5th, Donald's supervisor, Daisy Key, completes an employee evaluation on Donald. He was rated as a, quote, good or a 6 on a scale of 10, and acceptable or a 4 on other items. He's murdered 5 more in his first 3 months. His tally's now 31. June 20th, 1986, he murdered Edward Schreibels by giving him arsenic in his soup. There was no autopsy afterwards. Also in June, he attempts to poison Willie Johnson by putting arsenic in his food 4 separate times, but Willie wouldn't die. June 29th, Donald murders Robert Crockett by putting cyanide into his IV. So now he's gone from food, I'm just going straight into the IV.
Jeez.
July 7th, he murders Donald Barney by giving him cyanide through his feeding tube, as well as a direct injection of cyanide into his rear end.
Good grief.
July 25th, he uses cyanide again, this time on James Woods. He puts it in his gastric feeding tube. August 16th, Donald murders Ernest Fay. He puts arsenic in his gastric tube. And after he murders him, he takes a pair of knitted booties that belonged to Mr. Frey. So now he's gone from cookies to booties.
Wow.
The next day, on August 17th, Donald moves to Middletown, Ohio. And I believe this is when he and Carl really part ways. Now, Middletown's about 25 miles north of Cincinnati, but Drake Hospital's already 19 miles from downtown Cincinnati. It's already a little bit further up past the city.
Okay.
But the move didn't slow Donald down in any way. All he's doing is driving a little bit farther.
Right.
By August 29th, he's murdered Milton Cantor by giving him cyanide in his nasal tube. Permission for autopsy was not granted, even though his family wanted one. Donald took a lap blanket from Mr. Cantor. He's starting to gather mementos.
Yeah, little trophies.
A month later, on September 17th, Donald murders Roger Evans by giving him cyanide into his gastric tube. An autopsy was performed, but no cyanide was found.
Really?
And 3 days later, on September 20th, Claiborne Kendrick is given cyanide in his gastric feeding tube and an injection into his testicles. So now he's just torturing people.
Yeah.
Then a month later, on October 29th, Donald murders Albert Buellman by feeding him cyanide dissolved in a cup of water. And the following day, October 30th, he murdered William Collins by giving him cyanide dissolved in orange juice. So he kind of has these little patches or these little places. He does the same thing for a while, and then he changes it up, and then he'll change it up again.
Right.
But you'd think by this point that people around Donald would wonder why all the patients around him are dying.
Yeah.
And they did.
Okay.
They called him the Angel of Death. It was a joke. They called him the Angel of Death. People thought he was weird, that he cracked inappropriate jokes about how everybody on his floor would die around him.
And nobody caught on.
Yeah, nobody thought he was actually killing people.
Oh, my gosh.
They just thought he was weird. Like, I even read he would sit down to eat and everybody would, get up from the table and go. November 4th, Donald murders Henry Cody by giving him cyanide dissolved in water through his gastric tube. There was permission asked. They asked for permission to do an autopsy, but it's not given. They don't do the autopsy on him.
Really? Why not?
I don't know. I mean, I think these families are asking for autopsies and they're not being done. But even though he seems to be enjoying this murderous spree, Donald is depressed. He says he's very depressed. So also in November, Donald begins to see Dr. Mark Barbara for treatment of depression.
Okay.
He's depressed because of his breakup with Carl. And also this month, Donald tries again, unsuccessfully, to kill himself. He drives his car off a mountain road and sustains a head injury. Now, you'd think at this point, while they're calling him Dr. Death and he's depressed, why didn't anyone suspect anything? Why didn't anyone come forward? Why didn't anybody say something?
Right.
By now, in Donald's killing career, his murderous career, he's become more and more regular with his occult rituals. He would bring cyanide with him to the hospital almost every single day. He was intending to kill somebody every single day. And by the way, he's got 30 pounds of cyanide that he's pilfered off of over the years. That's his stash. 30 pounds.
Jeez.
So he's using that little bit by little bit.
Wow.
November 22nd, Donald murders Mose Thompson by giving him cyanide dissolved in water through his gastric tube. December 9th, 1986, Donald murdered Otis Day by giving him a cyanide solution as well. And a day later, on December 10th, he murdered Cleo Fish by giving him cyanide mixed with cranberry juice. Now, Donald took a lock of hair from him and burned it during his occult ceremony for Duncan. Also, somewhere in 1986, he poisoned Harold White and John Oldendick with arsenic, but the doses were too small to be fatal. Donald thought that in Oldendick's case, the dose of arsenic actually healed him.
Really?
Yeah, he thought that this guy got better because of him and his arsenic.
Okay.
January 10th, 1987, Donald murders Leo Parker by giving him cyanide in his feed bag. An autopsy failed to find that he was poisoned.
What kind of autopsy?
They're not checking for cyanide.
Wow.
February 5th, 1987, Margaret Cuckrow is murdered. He gave her cyanide in her orange juice. February 1987, Donald murders Stella Lemon by giving her cyanide in her orange juice. She died several weeks later on March 16th, 1987. On March 6th, 1987, Donald murdered Joe Pike by feeding him Decatol, an adhesive remover intended for use with colostomy bags. So he's switching it up a little bit.
Yeah.
The next day, March 7th, he murdered Hilda Lights by feeding her Decadrol through her G-tube as well as in her orange juice. So through her gastrointestinal tube.
Man.
Then Duncan picked a name in the flames. Duncan the demon picks a name in the flames.
Okay.
John Powell. John Powell is a man who's been in a horrific motorcycle accident. He's been at Drake for many months, I think like 9 months. Donald is going to later say that he reminded him of his father. Now, on the same day he murders Hilda, Donald kills John Powell by giving him cyanide in his gastric feeding tube. And John Powell is victim number 53.
Good grief.
Now, because it's a motor vehicle accident, he was riding his motorcycle, an autopsy must be performed. A day later, on March 8th, John Powell's autopsy was conducted by Dr. Lee Lehman, a forensic pathologist who had a background in biochemistry. Specifically, cyanide. And this meant that he knew exactly what cyanide smelled like and how to identify it. He cut open John Powell for the autopsy and immediately smelled
almonds.
The scent of bitter almonds.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And he knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
He does the autopsy. He sends samples to other labs in order to confirm what he thought was true. 3 different labs he sent stuff out to. They all sent back the exact same thing. It was a confirmation cyanide poisoning.
Yeah.
Now, the Cincinnati police are notified, and the investigation into John Powell's death begins. First, his food supply is checked. His wife is questioned. Nurses at the hospital are interviewed, and during one of these interviews, Donald Harvey's name was brought up because of his questionable ending of employment at the VA hospital. Now, even though the VA did not put it into his employment folder when he went to Drake, nurses and people work at different hospitals and people talk.
Sure.
People talk. And so somebody knew he left the VA under some suspicious circumstances.
Right.
The hospital employees at this time were volunteering to take polygraph tests, and Donald volunteered to take one after buying a book on how to beat a lie detector test.
Okay. For dummies.
Yeah, exactly. Polygraph for dummies.
Yeah.
He called in sick the day of his scheduled appointment, and he didn't take the test. And because he didn't take this test, Donald was brought in for questioning. And detectives Jim Lawson and Ron Camden questioned him for a good long while. And they played a little bit of good cop, bad cop, until finally Donald confessed to having put cyanide in John Powell's gastrointestinal tube.
Oh, wow. He confessed.
Just like he did the first time.
Wow.
He explained that it was because he felt sorry for him and his family. He denies he's ever done that for anybody else, ever. He says it was a mercy killing.
Yeah.
He's initially indicted for the aggravated first-degree murder of John Powell on April 6, 1987. Then, after securing a search warrant for Harvey's apartment, investigators found a mountain of evidence against him: jars of cyanide and arsenic, books on the occult and poison, and a detailed account of the murder, which he had written in a diary. Following this new discovery of evidence, Donald was arrested on one count of aggravated murder, and after filing a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, he was held under a $200,000 bond. The evidence against Harvey was growing rapidly, and investigators were beginning to look into several other mysterious deaths at the hospital.
Yeah.
Now, this is when a man named Pat Menarson, he's an anchor at WCPO TV in Cincinnati. So he hears about this guy, John Powell, being murdered by this part-time orderly.
Right.
And he starts getting in to Donald's history. He doubted. He's the one who said, this can't just be a one-off. There's no way.
Right.
He found it hard to believe that somebody who had spent almost 2 decades caring for patients would just suddenly kill one, but never had done it before.
Right.
Quote, according to the police, Harvey had been in healthcare since the age of 18. He was now 36. That meant he'd spent half of his life working in healthcare, taking care of patients in hospital settings, and for him to have killed one person in 18 years, suddenly, after caring for others all that time,
right,
it just didn't compute with me, end quote.
Yep.
Menarson said a short time after Harvey was arrested for Powell's murder, a call came into the newsroom. He picked up the phone, and on the other end of the line was a nurse from Drake Hospital who told him, quote, "We think there were others, and we need you to do something," end quote.
I'm smelling an Emmy.
I'm smelling an Emmy. Yeah. Menarson said that this nurse, that she went on to say that a lot of patients had died on the ward that she worked on with Donald Harvey. She would not give her name, but gave the names of 7 or 8 patients. He told her to call him at home if she wanted to talk about it again. Call me at home. Here's my number.
Right.
And a short time later, Menarson said he was at home framing his basement when the phone rang, and on the line this time was that nurse and a second nurse. And he said they now provided a list of 13 names.
Jeez.
Then one day, Pat Menarson said he's at work. He's at the television station. He's about to go on the air.
Right.
When one of the nurses called and said, quote, "We are all at my house. There are 8 or 9 of us here who all work on the same ward. We all feel the same way," end quote. And Pat dropped what he was doing. I guess he called somebody in. You got to come in and do the news.
I'm calling out.
And he walked out. He drove to this house. And these nurses and others would soon become members of what was known as Menarson's Army.
Wow.
Quote, "They were patients and employees who helped me find records and how things might have happened, and I began to assemble a profile of Harvey," end quote. One of those patients was a paraplegic who Pat said met him in the frozen food section of a Kroger that's not far from Drake. That was my grocery store when I lived there.
Wow.
I know that Kroger. Quote, "There in front of the frozen vegetables, I reached under this guy's legs and pulled out a thick folder that was full of publicly available documents," end quote. So these nurses and other people, nurses' aides, are going after him.
Okay.
And once Pat Menarson was able to confirm Donald's connection to the patients who died on his ward at Drake, Pat said that he went to Donald Harvey's attorney, William Whalen, who said, quote, "I don't believe it. He hasn't said anything about it. I've met with him only a few times, but let me get back to you," end quote. So William Whalen, Harvey's attorney, Donald Harvey's attorney, asked him, he just flat out said, quote, "I need to ask you, have you killed anybody else," end quote.
Right.
And Donald said, yes. And by his, quote, estimate, end quote, he'd killed as many as 70 people.
Jeez.
William Whalen knew if the prosecutors could link Donald to more than one murder, Donald's going to get the death penalty.
Right.
So in a bid to save his life, he offered prosecutors a deal. If the death penalty was taken off the table, Donald would accept a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole and confess to all of his murders. And the prosecutors agreed. And in a marathon session with prosecutors on August 11th, 1987, 35-year-old Donald Harvey sat down with investigators and confessed to committing 33 murders over the past 17 years. And as the days went on, that number eventually grew to 70 in all.
Grief.
Investigators were skeptical of the numbers that Donald was giving them and wanted to have his mental state assessed prior to taking his claim as fact. Following several psychiatric tests by numerous experts, a spokesman for the Cincinnati prosecutor's office explained the dilemma to the Cincinnati Post. Quote, "This man is sane, competent, but is a compulsive killer. He builds up tension in his body, so he kills people," end quote.
Man.
Donald, for his part, insisted that most of the murders were mercy killings, admitting that some, including the attacks on his friends, the pie, the mayonnaise, the drinks.
Right.
Yeah. That those acquaintances off the job, those had been done out of spite. And in televised interviews, Donald discussed his fascination with black magic. He pointedly refused to discuss his views on Satanism.
He didn't want to talk about Duncan.
He didn't want to talk about Duncan.
Yeah.
Donald Harvey entered the courtroom on August 18th, 1987, and pled guilty to 24 counts of aggravated murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. Just 4 days later, a 25th guilty plea earned him a total of 4 consecutive 20 years to life sentences. In addition to his life terms, Donald Harvey was fined $270,000. Nobody's ever seen that money.
Yeah, I'm going to say.
After Donald is in prison, Pat Menarson goes to see him for an interview where Donald said, quote, "Oh, I was going to kill you," end quote. And Pat asked him, "What were you going to do? Were you going to poison me?" And Donald said, quote, "Oh no, I had a special plan for you. I was going to take you out in the desert and drive stakes into the ground and tie you to the stakes on top of an anthill and pour honey on you and watch as the ants ate you alive," end quote.
Wow. He's watching too many John Wayne movies.
Harvey was indicted in Kentucky on September 7th, 1987, where he confessed to committing 12 murders while employed at Marymount Hospital. In November of 1987, he pled guilty and was sentenced to 8 life terms plus 20 years. In February 1988, he entered guilty pleas on 3 additional Cincinnati homicides and 3 attempted murders, drawing 3 life sentences plus 3 terms of 7 to 25 years. 2 years later, the investigation into the remaining deaths was closed after investigators determined that there was not enough evidence to pursue the other deaths. In a 1991 interview with a reporter from the Columbus Dispatch, Donald Harvey gave a rare glimpse into his mindset. When asked why he killed, he said, quote, "Well, people controlled me for 18 years, and then I controlled my own destiny. I controlled other people's lives, whether they lived or died. I had that power to control. What right did you have to decide that? Well, after I didn't get caught for the first 15, I thought it was my right. I appointed myself judge, prosecutor, and jury, so I played God," end quote.
Wow.
Donald Harvey's first scheduled parole hearing was set for 2047, when he would have been 95 years old. But as fate would have it, on March 28, 2017, authorities reported that Harvey had been found in his cell, severely beaten by his fellow inmate, James Elliott. Elliott said he figured it would give some people closure and peace of mind. Well, Elliott, you're probably right. James, you're probably right.
Yep.
James Elliott punched and nearly stomped the life out of Donald Harvey in his cell. James Elliott said he grew up in Kentucky near some of the relatives of Donald's victims.
Oh, wow.
Donald died 2 days later on March 30th, 2017, at the age of 65.
Wow. He definitely retired.
Yeah. But that is the story of the angel of death, Donald Harvey. And that's all I have to say about that. For nearly 7 years, Jane Doe has lived in the shadows, her past buried deep beneath layers of secrecy and silence. After completing more than was asked of her in her last assignment for the enigmatic Kywolf Project, Jane Doe vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of dead bodies and unanswered questions. But now, as the specter of her past returns with a vengeance, Jane finds herself thrust back into a world she thought she'd left behind forever. When her former sins come knocking on her door, Jane is faced with an impossible choice: continue to hide in the shadows, or once again take up arms against the forces that threaten to tear apart the fabric of society. With enemies lurking around every corner and allies who may not be what they seem, Jane must rely on her wits, training, and her unyielding determination to survive. And while trust is a luxury she cannot afford, Jane must confront the truth about herself and her past. As the clock ticks, she realizes that the line between family, friend, and foe are razor thin, and in the end, the only person she can rely on is herself. Jane Doe 4 Charlotte is available September 24th, 2024. No name, no regrets, no mercy.
You know, it's hard to believe that people just didn't put 2 + 2 together and could see that people were dying around him every day.
Yeah, but these were the wards where people were sent basically to die.
And I also have to take consideration this was, in the 70s when this whole thing started, and nothing like this had taken place before.
Yeah, no. But
so
at least that they knew of, right.
And nobody was expecting it.
Yeah.
And plus, like we were talking before, drugs didn't have barcodes and things like that. So things were a little bit more loose in those days.
Yeah. And, apparently he was all smiles and good to see you and, whatever, while he's got occult books and a skull in his gym bag with some cocaine spoons and some cyanide because he's got to take a few people out.
Yeah, and it sounds like he was a smart guy, too.
I think he was a smart guy. Remember, he got A's and B's in school, but he was bored. So he left and got his GED.
Wow.
But we don't have to worry about him anymore. He's with Duncan.
Yeah.
And his feet are warm right now.
Him and Duncan are sharing a very, very, very hot tub right now. So anyway.
Yes, they are.
Well, let's move on from that to a little bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right, number 1, I'm calling this, we are very delighted to offer you an interview.
Delighted.
Yes. In 2016, bank employee Alberto Lopez from Arizona was suspected of stealing $5,000 from his workplace over the course of 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah, he was reported to authorities and promptly quit his job and scurried off to Phoenix. All right.
Okay.
In 2018, despite being a fugitive, Alberto applied for a job as a dispatcher for, get it, local police department.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. On seeing his application and making the connection, the police couldn't believe their luck and thought the easiest way to catch him was to, offer him a job interview.
We'll just hire him. I was thinking they'd hired him. Okay.
Yeah, we'll just give him an interview.
Okay.
When he arrived, suited up and ready to impress, he was arrested on the spot.
Can you imagine you're handing over your resume and they're like, we're just going to put a cuff on that. Thank you, son.
Yeah, exactly. All right, number 2. I wonder if he gave his driver a good score.
Oh, a good rating?
Uh-huh. A Colorado crook carrying thousands of dollars of stolen merchandise walked right into the police's hands after he was caught trying to use an Uber as a getaway car. The bungling burglar was ransacking and plundering a store in Denver suburbs last week when he called the rideshare driver to pick him up.
Okay.
The store owner had called 911 after noticing a hole cut through the business's fencing and caught the surveillance footage of the thief inside. When the local Wheat Ridge police, that's where they were, Wheat Ridge, arrived on the scene, they discovered the Uber driver waiting nearby. He told cops his passenger, Jose, was headed right toward the car.
Okay.
Hey, are you looking for an Uber? An officer can be heard asking the suspect in body cam footage shared by the department. The man wearing a hood of his black sweatshirt up.
He's got his hoodie up. Okay.
Yeah, shoots his gaze sideways and hides his hands inside his pockets.
Okay.
He says, no, I don't need an Uber. He then gives the officers the fake name Raul as he takes several steps backwards and away from the cops. Yeah, he was immediately grabbed by the officers, but assures them he's not trying to make a break for it. Jose doubles down on his innocence and claims he's simply on his way to his mother's house. When he told...
It's always the mom.
I know. When he told he matches the description of the thief, he maintains he is not the man they're looking for, despite not carrying identification to prove he is Raul. The contents of his backpack, however, exposes the thin charade. The backpack is full of Milwaukee tools.
Oh.
Yeah. And the officer can be heard saying while rifling through the loot. Cops found more than $8,600 worth of electrical tools.
He got the good stuff.
Yep. He was taken into custody.
Into custody.
Into custody. He was taken into custody where fingerprint scanners confirmed his real identity. Quote, it may not be the best idea to have an Uber pick you up at the crime scene, Wheat Ridge police said on social media.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 26-year-old man by the name of Jose was booked on the following day on a plethora of charges, including theft of more than $2,000, criminal trespassing, and false reporting to the authorities, court records show.
You know, so when your Uber shows up, you know, they always pull up and you're like, for Chris? And instead it's like, for the getaway car?
Yeah.
You're here for the getaway car?
The first question would be, how fast can this car go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For Chris? No, for the getaway. Oh, not my Uber.
Yeah. Number 3, and finally, well, there you are.
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah, Scranton, Pennsylvania. Police say a Pennsylvania man hiding from police in the crawl space of his girlfriend's home fell through the ceiling directly in front of an officer's feet.
Wait, he's in the crawl space or he's in the attic?
He's in the crawl space.
Isn't crawl space underneath?
Well, the crawl space in the attic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Crawl space to me is like the...
underneath the house.
No,
yeah. He was in the attic.
Okay.
Police were searching the Scranton home Sunday for the 29-year-old Justin Thompson, who was wanted on charges of assault and harassment.
Hurry, honey, get in the attic.
Yeah, the Scranton Times Tribune reports that officers found Thompson in the crawl space and tried to grab him. He was able to get away, but then plunged into the kitchen where an officer was awaiting.
That's going to cost you some money.
Yeah. Police say that there were children nearby when Thompson fell, leading to a charge of endangering the welfare of children. He also picked up charges of resisting arrest, reckless endangerment, and other sordid things. His girlfriend was charged with hindering apprehension.
Yeah. The kids are just sitting there eating their SpaghettiOs and boom.
Yeah.
Mom's boyfriend falls from the ceiling.
Hey, how you doing?
And police are like, okay, and we're going to add reckless endangerment to a minor onto that one? Yeah, exactly.
And thanks for not making us chase you.
Well, if you've got a bless your heart or you know somebody who's calling an Uber for their getaway car, all you got to do is go to hitchedtohomicide.com while you're there, where you're there, while you're there.
Wherever
I'm telling you, we're
are.
falling apart with the custody today.
Custody.
And where we're going.
Yeah.
There's a pull-down menu, and while you're there, you can also suggest a case or tell us about your brush with true crime. Hopefully it's not falling through the attic.
Exactly.
That's my amazing husband out there.
That's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.